Hello explorers and welcome back to the continent of Milgana. Last time we looked at the physical geography of the continent and seas, but today we're getting into, in my opinion, the really interesting stuff. Today we'll be looking at the languages of the world. Throughout Milgana, there are 49 extant languages, split into 8 language families, although sorta 6. We'll go through each of the language families, highlight where each specific language is spoken, and touch on how language connections between nations impact their relations with each other. This here is the language map, with each language family given its own color for clarity's sake. The language families are Ligas, Oshitian, Allin, and Puy, which are closely related and arguably the same thing, Hakari and TKA, which are in a very similar position, Fong and Mei-Parita. Before we get into the specifics, I should mention that there's an obvious gap in the amount of languages between regions and language families. In Ippoligo, Grandine, and the Union of Allin tribes, there's a lot of languages spread sporadically throughout. However, in a massive place like Hakar, there's far fewer languages. This seems kind of backwards at first, but it's due to centralization. Hakar is decentralized for an empire, but it is still an empire. The vast majority of languages spoken throughout Hakar have been lost to time as the major languages are just more useful to know. However, in areas with a history of decentralization or a lack of strong government, there are far more languages spoken, in some cases by less than 100,000 people. With all that said, let's begin first with the Ligas languages, spoken in central southern Milgana along the north coast of the Golden Sea. North Ligasort, New Ligasort, Palisor, and Tischa are the 4 Liga-speaking majority nations, although there are sizable minority populations in other nations as well. The Ligas languages are split into the western and eastern branches. The first western Ligas language is Tischa. Unsurprisingly, this is spoken in Tischa as the dominant language. However, most of northern Oshitian does speak Tischa as their first language as well. Obviously, Pali is spoken in Palisor. Ligasina, or modern Ligasina, is the first Eastern Ligas language, spoken in New Ligasort and North Ligasort, though less dominant in the north. Next is the Wagnera language, spoken by a small population spread between North Ligasort and southern Hakar. The Wagnera language is often forgotten, but it, alongside another language, Grapina, have seen a lot of heightened appreciation since North Ligasort got independence. Grapina is spoken in the northwest of the nation, as well as northern New Ligasort and southwestern Travdol, although it's slowly dying here. After the Ligas language family is the Oshitian language family. First, we have the sparsely spoken language of Garofnus, spoken on the southern island of Garof. This language is very different from the other Oshitian languages, only slightly resembling its related tongues. Next is the second most spoken Oshitian language, Shistian. While it's the sole official language of Shistian, Shistian is actually only the first language of less than half the population. Most of those in the north do speak it, but not natively. Spun off of Old Shistian is Gidchia, a close language that's nearly mutually intelligible with Shistian. This language developed from Shistian settlers who traveled north centuries before the kingdom actually controlled the area. Over in the TKA language group, Gala is the most spoken Oshitian language. The official language of Galatesia, and spoken throughout the mainland of the SMU, along with a sizable diaspora in southern Hakar, Gala is the most well-known language of this family throughout Milgana. Kisha is spoken on Kish Island, and Sorskish, a derivation of the language, is spoken on the nearby Sors Island. Next, we have the Allin language family. Now, Allin and Puy languages are all closely related. The two families split from each other far later than from the other language families of Milgana. While some have suggested that the two families should be considered one, this has been aggressively rejected by Puy scholars, primarily for cultural and nationalistic reasons, rather than linguistic. So, we'll consider these as 2 separate language families for now. I would show both in the same chart, however there are a lot of Allin languages, so I separated them for clarity. Now, let's get into the languages themselves. We have the West and East Allin groups. Rather than going in strict numerical order, let's start with the East Allin languages, since there's only 2. Tilor and Livko are both part of the Oltev language group, the only extant East Allin group. Both these languages are spoken in Travdol, Tilor in the west and Livko in the east. The Livko is also spoken by hundreds of thousands in southwest Dakar. Getting to the West Allin group, and more specific the Glolian group, we'll start with Dinan, the language of northern Grandine. It and Kalenma are the 2 most spoken languages in Grandine, though there is a language in a relatively close third place, which we'll come back to in just a moment. Jilkana is one of the most spoken languages in the Union of Allin tribes, and home to the capital Aralavo. It also has two languages that are derived from it, Lirkin in the west and southwest, which is the third most spoken language in Grandin that I mentioned a minute ago, and Churlo in the south. Next, the Okira group of eastern UOT contains Parinka, Gildro, and Cochilno. Aside from Jilkana, these are the most spoken languages throughout the Union. In the Arpillo group, Harano is spoken along the northern coast, with Galacho spoken in just a few nearby cities. And finally, Allin, of course, is spoken in Allinville. Now we can move on to the Pyrenean languages, which, once again, are very closely related to the Allin languages. The first and strangest of the Pyrenean languages is Tio, spoken in the Tischa mountains way down here in Schistine. Now, how a Pyrenean language ended up being the dominant language in a mountain range so far away is a complete mystery. For a long time, Tio was considered an Allin language, before historical records made it more clear that the language is descended from Old Pyrenees. Current theories hypothesize that, perhaps during the age of the First or Second Pyrenean empires, settlers were sent south to colonize for the empire, and ended up stranded in the mountains. Whatever their origin, though, the Tio speak the most unique language in the family. Getting to the more commonplace Pyrenean languages, we have North and South Pyrenees, split from dialects of Middle Pyrenees. Some still consider these two to be dialects of the same language, and this was official policy up until the collapse of the Third Empire. Finally, Guirandi is a sparsely spoken language in northern Grandin and the Herero archipelago right here. The language was a result of Pyrenees settlements in the area during occupation, and the name is a corruption of Grandin. After the Pyrenees family are the Hakari and TKA families, which are closely related as well. Though it's becoming a better known fact throughout both populations that their languages are closely related, they're still largely considered to be separate families. Keeping the language family separate is a very popular idea among Torsti language speakers, especially following the Hakari invasion of the Faltan-Torsti Union. Looking at the Hakari languages, we notice very few, like I mentioned earlier. Though there were previously vastly more Hakari languages, they've all but disappeared in favor of the more popular languages that are seen as acceptable in the eyes of the Hakari government. Sakarth just barely manages to be the most widely spoken Hakari language, over Skorhaki. While Sakarth is the dominant language over a much wider region, the sheer density of people in Skorhaki-speaking areas means that the two languages are very close in native speakers. Together, the two languages completely dominate Hakari culture and government. There are two more Hakari languages, however, in the Ikarari branch, this being Karari and Hiskarari of northwestern Hakar. Karari is actually spoken by a very sizable population, even if it does still get overshadowed by Sakarth and Skorhaki. Hiskarari is less spoken, but the Hiskarari phrase, Girka Hiperka Notar, or Only Blood for Pyrenees, became a popular rallying cry during the war between the lakes, mostly since that's the language spoken on the Pyrenee frontier. As for the TKA family, there's only 3 surviving languages. Hlik is spoken in the kingdom of Hliktor within Hakar, although due to the kingdom's reduced size when it was forcibly annexed by Hakar, a majority of speakers aren't actually located in the kingdom anymore. While the new ruling family are loyal to Hakar, the Hlik population as a whole is very divided on whether they should support Hakar or resist their rule. Torsti, the most widely spoken of the TKA languages, is of course one of the 2 major tongues of the Faltan-Torsti Union. Spoken by millions, its reach stretches far more than the other TKA languages. As mentioned before, its relation to the Hakari languages has become a controversial topic. After the recent invasion and subsequent defeat at the hands of Hakari forces, treating the TKA languages as a completely separate and unique group has actually become a source of national pride in Torstia, where conflating their own language with the family as a whole isn't that uncommon. Nearby, in the kingdom of Filkti, Filk is spoken. The Filks have a very different relationship with Hakar, seeing them as their closest friend and ally. Though having long seen Torstia as a brotherly nation, many Filks actually sided with Hakar during their invasion. This has become a source of tension between the two, as Torstis have called the Filks' change of loyalties a betrayal of brothers. Moving on from the TKA languages, we have the oft-forgotten Fong languages. Most of the Fong language speakers either are or recently were a part of the Faltan-Torsti Union. Though once independent, all of these lands were eventually conquered by Torstia and turned into the Eastern Territories. While political treatment has improved over time, the Fong languages are still often neglected, and definitely seen as secondary to Torstia and Faltan. The Fong language Girong is spoken in the far northeast of the Union. Jinmarn, the most spoken language, is primarily used just west of that, with the derived language Hirmir to the south. The 2 Gesersna languages, Jailitsar and Bibapsara, are spoken in the east, with Jailitsara located on the Galirto Peninsula, which was recently annexed by Hakar. This has definitely been a source of tension for those speaking the language, as treatment under Hakari has been seen as harsher than under the Faltan-Torsti Union. Finally, we come to the Mei-Parita languages. Faltan, spoken in, you guessed it, Faltan, is the most unique language of the family, and so isn't often seen as a true Mei-Parita language by speakers of the others. Indeed, Faltan has shown no kinship to those speaking similar languages, as shown by their ongoing invasion of Uighur, where Uighurta is spoken. Oddly enough, due to the decentralized structure of Ipiligo, the Kingdom of Fuego, which controls western Uighur, has been left almost completely on its own to defend against the incursion, as it slowly loses ground month by month. The Mei-Parita languages that aren't Faltan are all called the Tipo languages, with Uighurta being a West Tipo language. The other West Tipo languages are Tilgapa, Hawaneta, and Orega, which together make up the majority of the population of Ipiligo. The island Hawanet actually hosts the capital of Chikoro, while the other two languages are spoken on the large island Garan. The East Tipo languages, Togar and Awapa, are in turn spoken on Gorapa. Higorto and Jarka, the South Tipo languages, are spoken on the islands near the Faltan-Torsti Union. That's going to conclude our look at all the languages of Milgana. One thing to note is that all these languages are related. These language trees didn't develop on their own, they all come from one common tongue, spoken long, long ago. This hypothetical language is referred to as Proto-Milganan, and though it's unknown exactly where it started, it's thought that the Mei-Parita languages are the most faithful to this original tongue. Regardless, thank you for watching today. Please do leave a like and subscribe, it really means a lot, and thanks for stopping by. Cool, thank you for watching the video. Thank you for all the support on the last one, guys. I didn't expect that. I had like 46 subscribers. I post that video. Now there's over 300. I don't know how that happened, but thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna keep posting content on continent. I've been saying continent too much. I'm gonna keep posting content on Milgana. I do plan to do other stuff as well. I'm not 100% sure yet, but stay tuned, there'll be other stuff. And if you're not interested in that, hey, the Milgana videos will keep on coming. Yeah. Please subscribe, and thank you for watching.